this up a little so that they can hear a little bit better what you guys would say. Okay, well, welcome back. It's good to be with you again.
Welcome to you too.
It's good to be healthy again. I feel wonderful. I'm really grateful. Everybody who, Linda, people reached out and asked how I was doing and just showed that they cared. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that Ed Sissick was willing to step up and do that. That's not an easy thing to stand up in front of people. And he did it very kindly, willingly, and did it well. That made it easier on me that I didn't have to worry about getting well and whether church would happen. So I'm thankful that everybody decorated. The people who stayed and decorated, that they did a great job. They deserve a lot of thanks and credit for making it look great in there.
The tree is beautiful.
It sure is. Yeah.
When you get up on that ladder and put that last thing on, I'm thinking, oh, I don't think I ought to do this next year.
Does it feel pretty tall?
Yeah.
Well,
What happens when you're tall? Short people get away with stuff.
well, we've got a few joining us online. Good to see you online. Those of you who might be watching online and wondered where we've been the last few weeks, well, last Thursday, of course, was Christmas, but before that, I was sick. So I missed, has it been 2 or 3 weeks I missed?
Yeah,
Two. I got the coronavirus and I felt pretty bad for about 6 days. And then it started getting better, and about 3 days after I started feeling better, I was feeling pretty good. So it was definitely unpleasant, and more unpleasant than longer lasting than the flu anyway. So, but I'm glad I got it over with. I feel a little bit relieved that now I don't think I have to worry about it as much.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, but I think, maybe they don't know for sure, but I've been told, I wouldn't transmit it either. I don't think they're 100% sure about that though.
I don't think they're very sure about any of it.
It's all pretty new,
It
so.
changes the story.
Yeah.
Anyway, I feel better and I'm thankful.
That means an awful lot.
Yeah. So sorry to have missed, but we're back at it. Proverbs chapter 14. So if you got your Bibles, go ahead and open up to chapter 14. Is that where you have us at? That's where your bookmark is? Good. I have to confess, I've kind of forgotten where we left off because I didn't make a mark. But let's take 14 and we'll move pretty quickly again. I'm moving quickly because it really does repeat itself quite a bit
Okay.
and expresses the same ideas in different words.
Okay.
So we're going to move fast. 14:1. The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. He whose walk is upright fears the Lord, but he whose ways are devious despises him. That first verse, the wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears her down. You've seen this before, the saying, you're your own worst enemy. People do undermine themselves. People do spoil their own lives often. We just have a way, all human beings, I think, to some extent, are their own worst enemies. And that's what it's saying there. So and then whose walk is upright fears the Lord, but he whose ways are devious despises him. And there's this relationship between wisdom and God. And I think it has to do with a number of things. It has to do with humility. It has to do with acknowledgement of a higher power. And that goes along with wisdom and virtue. So being humble, recognizing that you're not God and you're not the highest authority and you don't know everything. That's actually part of wisdom. So for Proverbs anyway, and I think this is true, I would agree with this, there is a connection between morality, doing right, and what you believe. Not that having to believe all the right things is what makes you a good person, but there is a relationship between having respect for God, for a higher power, and the humility that is, I think, the foundation of good character, right? I think humility is the foundational virtue. and all the other virtues build on that. Dante thought that too, which is why the worst sin is pride, because pride's the opposite of humility. So humility is the foundation of virtue, and there's something about believing in God, believing that there's something greater than yourself, that is humbling. So I think the connection that it draws is valid. Verse 3, a fool's talk brings a rod to his neck, but the lips of the wise protect them. There's a special attention in Proverbs on speech, that what we say is important and reflects both moral character and wisdom. And so, yeah, being watchful and careful about what you say and what you don't say is important for the book of Proverbs. And I think that's an important lesson. That's one of the places where I still have quite a bit to learn. Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest. I'm not really sure what the point of that is. Maybe that success and prosperity are related to hard work, but that's a bit of an odd saying. If any of you have any insight what that might mean, share it in the comments. Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest. Verse 5, a truthful witness does not deceive, but a false witness pours out lies. Again, this attention to the words of your mouth are so important in Proverbs, that what you say be truthful, not both that what you say be truthful and honest, but also that you don't talk when you shouldn't, right? A reticence, careful speech, thoughtful speech versus careless and, people who just spew out whatever's on their mind. That's a big part of wisdom and as a theme. The mocker seeks wisdom and finds none, but knowledge comes easily to the discerning. Stay away from a foolish man, for you will not find knowledge on his lips. The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. So avoid foolish people because they'll lead you astray. Fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright. That is, again, a connection between wisdom and belief, faith in God, because a fool will mock caring about sin and wanting to be contrite, wanting to make amends. But a wise person will be humble enough to admit when they've sinned and would want to make amends. Verse 10, each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. There is, in other words, there is an element to us that is alone with ourselves. Everyone lives in their own inner world to some extent. Does that make sense? Verse 11, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. That's that consistent theme that I mentioned Sunday morning that the book of Proverbs has, which is that there's a correlation of if you're wicked, your house will be destroyed. Meaning, if you're bad, bad things will happen. If you're good, good things will happen. That's what Proverbs seems to say over and over again, and that's the part of Proverbs where I would disagree, but the Bible disagrees too. That when you then read Job, right, or Ecclesiastes, you hear the opposite. And so just think about that as we move forward. There is some truth. I think I've been over this before. There's some truth to it, right? There's some correlation, and you always teach your children that. I tell my children, look, be honest, be hardworking, do what's right, and you'll get good rewards, right? I can hear my wife say it. Good choices, good rewards. Bad choices, bad consequences. There's a truth to that, and you do teach it to children. But as you get older, you realize that the world is a little bit more complex, don't you? That
It's life happens.
yeah, that sometimes bad consequences come to people who've made good choices. So it's true to an extent, right? And this, to be thoughtful Christians, you can't always think in total black and white.
Yeah.
Life has grays in it.
Yeah.
Okay, verse 12. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. And that's again a caution for humility, that you need to be open-minded, and you need to be humble, and you need to be willing to be corrected, and you need to always be learning, because what seems right to you at a glance, without thought, without instruction, may have a bad end. So don't be overconfident. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and joy may end in grief. And that, I like that, because it says, whether you're happy or sad, there can always be a turn in fortune, right? Everything changes. Those who are weeping now might rejoice later. Those who are rejoicing now might weep later. So there's always in life this potential for sorrow to turn to joy, but also vice versa. There's a story that it's a Jewish legend. King Solomon, this is supposed to have been written by him. King Solomon was wise and wealthy, and he'd heard a myth about a ring that had magical powers, and this ring could make a happy man sad and a sad man happy. And Solomon heard that this ring existed and that it could make a sad man happy and a happy man sad, and he sent his most trusted servant Benaiah out to find it. Eventually, the servant Benaiah found this ring, but the kicker of the story, the climax of the story is that this ring, when it's brought to Solomon, doesn't have magical powers. It has an inscription, and the inscription simply says, "This too shall pass." Right? And the idea is that is what gives it the power to make the sad man. Because if you're sad right now, this too shall pass. If you're happy right now, this too shall pass. Happiness and sorrow come and go, because that's the nature of life, and that's a deep truth that runs through Proverbs. Okay. The faithless, so that's my comment on even in laughter the heart may ache and joy may end in grief. The faithless will be fully repaid for their ways, and the good man rewarded for his. Again, that idea that good choices, good rewards. Bad choices, bad consequences. A wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. A quick-tempered man does foolish things, and a crafty man is hated. The simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. And again, here, simple, that word for us doesn't have negative connotations, I don't think. But in Proverbs, simple is a synonym for a fool. Simple means uneducated. Someone who hasn't studied is a simple person. Evil men will bow down in the presence of the good, and the wicked at the gates of the righteous. The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. Now, I don't know if that's the way to read that. I think there's an irony in that. The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, and that's true, and that's not a good thing. But that's, I think, a sad, tragic truth that poor people they don't have as many friends as the rich people. And that I think people who have money have a hard time understanding why poor people have such a hard time in life. There's a lot of, when you are poor, everything in life is harder. You have fewer resources, you have fewer people giving you advice, you have less time, everything is made so much more difficult in the life of a poor person. My wife is watching that show that a lot of people are watching called The Crown. You guys ever heard of that? It just tells the story of the British monarchy, the recent monarchy, Queen Elizabeth. Anyway, there's an episode where this poor man, and I guess it's a true story, this poor man actually broke into Windsor Castle and got into the Queen's bedroom and had a short conversation with the Queen before the security guards came and took him away wherever they took him. But I think there's some artistic license in the show. But anyway, this man was very poor. He'd lost his family, he'd lost his children, he'd lost his job, and he's just telling the Queen, he broke in and he just wanted to talk to her and say, you have to remember how hard it is to be poor. And this is when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and there were a lot of things going on in British politics that were not helpful to the poor. So anyway, I just bring that up as a illustration that it was in the show. You can see that the Queen takes what this man has said to heart, but it's just that illustration that sometimes and we, all of us are relatively successful and privileged. We don't always appreciate how much suffering is involved in being poor and how much harder it makes every dimension of life. And this is part of that. The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. You know, the more money you have, the more well-connected you tend to be. But poor people don't have those connections and resources. He who despises his neighbor sins, but blessed is he who is kind to the needy. Remember that's Job's description of his righteousness had a lot to do with Job being a champion of the poor. And the Bible definitely sees that as part of righteousness. We, I think in America, don't always pay enough attention to that. That part of what God expects from us is that we be champions of the poor, that we stand up for the rights of the widow and the orphan and the needy. Verse 22, do not those who plot evil go astray, but those who plan what is good find love and faithfulness. All hard work brings profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Again, more you get what you deserve, right? Which we know isn't always true, but to some extent it is. The wealth of the wise is their crown, but the folly of fools yields folly. A truthful witness saves lives, but a false witness is deceitful. He who fears that's a very simple truth, but it's also easy to forget, isn't it? That it's good to tell the truth and it's wrong to lie. You know, lying is not good. Lying is a very serious sin. He who fears the Lord has a secure fortress, and for his children it will be a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, turning a man from the snares of death. A large population is a king's glory, but without subjects a prince is ruined. Yeah, you can't have a king without subjects, right? A king, in that sense, is dependent. You're not a king if you don't have any people who obey you and do what you say. You call yourself a king, but until there's people who listen to you and do your bidding, you're not really a king. A patient man has great understanding, but a quick-tempered man displays folly. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. That's sort of the idea of a satisfied mind, right? And this is a theme that's brought out in a lot of early Christian preaching, that actually the rich person is the person whose needs are satisfied. A poor person is someone who has many desires, right? So you could have a lot of money, but if you are not satisfied with that, if you just want more, then you're actually poor. You might not have a lot of money, but you feel content. You feel your mind is satisfied. Well, then that's actually what true richness means. So a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. He who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. Again, I think that's worth emphasizing in these times, because we can forget that and be a little bit selfish and think that, you know, the poor deserve to be poor and we don't need to help them. But that's not what the Bible says. When calamity comes, the wicked are brought down, but even in death the righteous have a refuge. Wisdom reposes in the heart of the discerning, and even among fools she lets herself be known. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. A king delights in a wise servant, but a shameful servant incurs his wrath. That's the verse 33. Even among fools, wisdom she lets herself be known. That's the good news, is that you don't have to stay foolish. Wisdom is there. It's offered to you. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The simple can become wise. The foolish can educate themselves. Right? So there's chapter 14. Let's do chapter 15. Any questions? Go ahead and type your questions in the comments. I'm glad to have you all here. Chapter 15, verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. That's a popular one. Have you heard that one before? That's a very commonly cited quote from Proverbs. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And there's that theme again of being careful with your speech, being gentle with your speech, not speaking in anger, but speaking in gentleness. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly, right? The fool talks a lot, but doesn't say anything. Right? Words just pour out of their mouths, but they're worthless. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. Sounds like Santa, doesn't it? That's what my kids are asking questions about Santa. And he knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. That's kind of what it's saying. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. The tongue that brings but that's an important reminder for adults too. Don't think that Jesus said this, right? Jesus said everything hidden will be revealed, right? So what you've done in secret will be shouted from the rooftops. So don't think that you can conceal your wickedness, because the light will eventually come. The tongue that brings healing is a tree of life, but a deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. A fool spurns his father's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence. Right? Again, and that's the theme of the Father and the Son, which we see coming. Solomon is saying a lot of these as advice to his own son. This is what you teach your children. That's what Proverbs really is about. It's it's kind of a manual, I think, for bringing up children. The house of the righteous contains great treasure, but the income of the wicked brings them trouble. So if you are wicked, then your wealth will not necessarily be a blessing, is what it's saying. The lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the hearts of fools. The Lord detests the sacrifice of the wicked, but the prayer of the upright pleases him. So God won't respect the sacrifice of the wicked person. And that's a warning the prophets give in the Bible a lot, which is don't come, in other words, in modern terms, don't come to church and sing your songs and think God will be happy if you're not living a good life, right? If you're doing wicked things, if you're telling lies, if you're cheating people out of their money, and then you come to church on Sunday and you sing your songs, God's not going to enjoy your worship. You have to make your life match God's will, and then you can come give your glory to God. That's the message there.
This old chapter, it's saying, when, if we're doing the wicked, and then they pray for all of us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
back and forth.
Yeah, good insight, Beth. This is verse 10. Stern discipline awaits him who leaves the path. He who hates correction will die. It's asking you to be willing to be taught. Don't become so stubborn that you're not willing to listen to anyone. Death and destruction lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of men? A mocker resents correction. He will not consult the wise. Right? Again, this part of foolishness is being stubborn, is being bullheaded, is being unwilling to listen. A happy heart makes the face cheerful, but heartache crushes the spirit. The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. All the days of the oppressed are wretched, but the cheerful heart has a continual feast. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. And there's the hint that it's not so simple as if you're good, you're prosperous, and if you're bad, you're not. There's an awareness here that, yeah, there's rich people there's wicked people that have a lot, but their life isn't going to have peace. There's going to be inner conflicts that you may not see, but they're there in their spirit. Verse 17, better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred. It'd be better to live in a house with peace and love and eat vegetables than to live in a house that has caviar and champagne but is full of strife and lying and negativity. Verse 18, a hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. And this is a theme. The wise man is calm and gentle. The wise man walks into a situation and doesn't react with passion, with anger, but is calm and patient and gentle. The way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Right? That's the commandments, right? Honor your father and mother. Folly delights a man who lacks judgment, but a man of understanding keeps a straight course. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Give that theme of the wise person will listen, will consult people who know more than they do. A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. The path of life leads upward for the wise to keep him from going down to the grave, right? Again, the wise person does well. The Lord tears down the proud man's house, but he keeps the widow's boundaries intact. God, that's an important verse in general in the Old Testament. God does take sides. God favors the poor and the weak and the vulnerable. And God judges more harshly those who are powerful and wealthy. That is a clear theme throughout the Bible, and you can see it here. The Lord tears down the proud man's house, but he keeps the widow's bound. And a widow would be a vulnerable, weak person. Right? Because a widow, it might not be the case for all of us here, but in those times, a widow would be poor and would have little power or influence. Because a woman couldn't own property, a woman couldn't go to court or file a lawsuit. A widow was pretty helpless. And so what the Bible's saying is that God watches out for those kinds of people. The people who are weak and vulnerable and can't look out for themselves, God is on their side. And God looks at the proud and says, you better watch out. The Lord detests the thoughts of the wicked, but those of the pure are pleasing to him. A greedy man brings trouble to his family, but he who hates bribes will live. Maybe a lot of businessmen could use to hear that, right? Yeah, and that's, I think, what was that movie that came out in the 80s where it had the famous line? I think Richard Gere says it, but greed is good. You remember that line? I can't remember what movie that's from. But there's a sentiment in our culture that greed is good, right? Because it makes us ambitious and it gets the economy going. But for the Bible, greed is a very serious and problematic sin, and a lot of the problems that we have come from greed. I think sometimes we tend to think problems come from laziness, and maybe some do, but there's also a lot of problems that come from greed. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. A cheerful look brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to the bones. He who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise, right? He who listens to a life-giving rebuke, right? Someone who is willing to be corrected. And that's a hard thing. I don't like to be corrected. I don't like to be called out. No one does.
Yeah.
But what Proverbs is saying is, if you're wise, then you might not like it, but you'll be open to being called out and told that you're wrong. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. Same theme. The fear of the Lord teaches a man wisdom, and humility comes before honor. Meaning, humility is the foundation that you build on. Someone who was honored was first humble. Right? So what it's saying is that the wise life, the virtuous life, begins with humility. And from there, you build up to knowledge and wisdom and eventually honor. Okay, chapter 16. We're going to keep going. Let's get through this fast because again, there's a lot of repetition. To man belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the reply of the tongue. And that's, I think, saying, you can make your plans, but God might change them. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord. And everyone thinks they're right, but God is the judge. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. The Lord works out everything for his own ends. even the wicked for a day of disaster. The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Right? It's easy to think that the wicked might get away with it, because sometimes they do. They seem to. But Proverbs says, don't worry, God is watching, and the wicked will get their due. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. That's through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, a man avoids evil. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies live at peace with him. Better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. Right? Better to be poor, but to have been upright, honest, and good, than to be rich, but to have gotten rich by shady methods. Verse 9. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Right? That's again the same thing as the first verse. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. So there's awareness. The wise have the awareness that what they planned, it might not be what God decides is going to happen. So you always have to make your plan. It's fine to plan, but know that it might not happen the way you expect. I think everyone's probably experienced that. Verse 10, the lips of a king speak as an oracle, and his mouth should not betray justice. Again, there's this idea that those who are kings, those who are powerful, those who have money, are held to a higher standard, right? Honest scales and balances are from the Lord. All the weights in the bag are of his making, right? That's honest scales. That's you weigh out gold, meaning the way, and Jews have always believed this, that the way you do business is something that God cares about, right? The way you run your business, if you're honest in your business dealings, that is something God pays close attention to. Kings detest wrongdoing, for a throne is established through righteousness. Kings take pleasure in honest lips. They value a man who speaks the truth. A king's wrath is a messenger of death, but a wise man will appease it. When a king, and this again, we're talking about this whole section as a theme of kings and rulers and what's expected of them, and the way subjects should respect them. A king's wrath is a messenger of death, but a wise man will appease it. When a king's face brightens, it means life. His favor is like a rain cloud in spring. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to choose understanding rather than silver. That's a theme that has gone throughout the whole book of Proverbs, which is that wisdom is more valuable than money or gold or silver or what have you. The highway of the upright avoids evil. He who guards his way guards his life. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. That's a famous verse, isn't it? Pride comes before the fall. And that's why I say, for Christianity, for the Bible, humility is the starting point for virtue. And pride, of course, is the first sin. Evil begins with sin came into the world through pride. Virtue begins with its opposite, humility. Better to be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. Right? So that's a subtext to, yes, you have the idea that the righteous will be prosperous, but you also have these verses that say, it's being wealthy isn't the best thing. To be good is better than to be wealthy. So better to be lowly in spirit and among the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. Whoever gives heed to instruction prospers. Blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. The wise in heart are called discerning, and pleasant words promote instruction. Understanding is a fountain of life to those who have it, but folly brings punishment to fools. A wise man's heart guides his mouth, and his lips promote instruction. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. These are all things we've heard before. The laborer's appetite works for him, his hunger drives him on. A scoundrel plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. A perverse man stirs up dissension, and a gossip separates close friends, right? That's connected to watching your tongue and being careful what you say. The perverse man stirs up trouble, is always whispering rumors. Gossip separates close friends. I think that's an important lesson. Gossip can really cause problems, especially in a church, but also in a family or in a group of friends. Gossip is incredibly destructive, and the Bible has very harsh things to say about gossip. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him down a path that is not good. He who winks with his eye is plotting perversity. He who purses his lips is bent on evil. Gray hair is a crown of splendor. It is attained by a righteous life. I like that verse. I got a little gray. Better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. All right. Any questions so far? Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 17. Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. You've heard that before. Same thing. A wise servant will rule over a disgraceful son and will share the inheritance as one of the brothers. There's the idea that's kind of promoted in a lot of American, I think about Benjamin Franklin, right? Poor Man's Almanac. But the idea that the poor man who works hard and is honest will rise up. And I think that's not always true, but it definitely can be. And that's what's being said here. A wise servant will rule over a disgraced son, right? So what's imagined here is that you've got a rich man who has a son, and that son is no good. Doesn't listen, doesn't conduct himself with righteousness. But in that same household might be a servant. Eventually, the servant who does what's right will rise above the son who is disobedient and reckless, and the prodigal. Verse 3: the crucible for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the heart. That's the metaphor there, is that just as gold and silver have to be refined in a fire of a furnace, that's what God does to our hearts, right? God puts our hearts to the test by testing us with fire. Does that make sense? A wicked man listens to evil lips, a liar pays attention to a malicious tongue. He who mocks the poor shows contempt for their maker. Whoever gloats over disaster will not go unpunished. Children's children are a crown to the aged. Everyone loves their grandkids. And parents are the pride of their children. Arrogant lips are unsuited to a fool. How much worse lying lips to a ruler? Right? A fool, just as a fool shouldn't be talking very much, right? Shouldn't be boasting. But then the proverb turns that around and says, how much worse is it if a king or a ruler is a liar? And again, that's the idea that the higher you are in the hierarchy, the higher your expectations. A bribe is a charm to the one who gives it. Wherever he turns, he succeeds. He who covers over an offense promotes love, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Right? That verse 9 is good advice for probably couples. He who covers over, that doesn't mean necessarily hide, but it means forgives and lets go, right? Passes it over, lets it go, right? And in a marriage or in a friendship, there are times when you have to let things go, right? So he who covers over an offense promotes love, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. So your spouse or your friend has done something wrong, you keep bringing it up, well, that is going to drive you apart. But if you're able as a friend to overlook a wrong and let it pass, let it be in the past, and don't dig it up again, then that promotes reconciliation and healing. Verse 10, a rebuke impresses a man of discernment more than 100 lashes a fool. So, a rebuke impresses a man of discernment. Someone who's wise will benefit from a rebuke more than a fool will benefit from 100 whippings, right? You can whip a fool. I just think that's a vivid contrast, right? A simple word of correction will be taken by a wise man and done something with it, but you can whip a fool with a whip, and then they still won't learn, right? They still won't. And again, the theme there is the wise is open to correction. Verse 11, an evil man is bent only on rebellion, a merciless official will be sent against him. Better to meet a bear robbed of her cubs than a fool in his folly. That's the idea that a fool is dangerous. We've been told before, stay away from fools because they'll lead you down the wrong path. And this is saying a foolish person is more dangerous than a bear who's been separated from her cubs, which, is a dangerous thing. If a man pays back evil for good, evil will never leave his house. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. That kind of connects back up to verse 9, which is there's a wise person will let a quarrel go and not stir it up. Verse 15, acquitting the guilty and condemning the innocent, the Lord detests them both. Right? Of what use is money in the hand of a fool, since he has no desire to get wisdom? Money won't do a fool any good. You can hear. Have you ever heard those stories about the people who won the lottery, and then in 10 years they're back living worse than they were before they won? That is sadly often true. If you have money but you don't have wisdom, it won't necessarily amount to much. It's not gonna. That money isn't gonna help you if you aren't willing to educate yourself. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity, right? Adversity tests who your friends are, doesn't it? Does that make sense? No? It's saying a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity, meaning a true friend is going to be there for you when things aren't going well. Right? That's the mark of a true friend, is that they're there when the going gets rough. All right. Verse 18. A man lacking in judgment strikes hands in pledge and puts up security for his neighbor. Right, and that's a warning. Does that make sense to you? That's a warning not to easily enter into business deals with people, or just be careful about who you deal with. He who loves a quarrel loves sin. He who builds a high gate invites destruction. That's a good one. A man of perverse heart does not prosper. He whose tongue is deceitful falls into trouble. To have a fool for a son brings grief. There is no joy for the father of a fool. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. A wicked man accepts a bribe in secret to pervert the course of justice. A discerning man keeps wisdom in view, but a fool's eyes wander to the ends of the earth. A foolish son brings grief to his father and bitterness to the one who bore him. It is not good to punish an innocent man or to flog officials for their integrity. Verse 24, a foolish son brings grief to his father. That's part of that theme of this. The whole book of Proverbs very much has in mind parents and children. That the contents of Proverbs is that body of knowledge that should be passed on from parent to child. And the child who listens is going to delight his father. But the child that doesn't listen and doesn't learn is going to cause heartache. It is not good to punish an innocent man or to flog officials for their integrity. It should be obvious, right? But don't punish an innocent man and don't flog officials for their integrity. But that comes up, I think, in a lot of cases with what we call whistleblowers, right? Someone works at a company or government, they see something going on that's wrong, right? And sometimes they're punished for saying something, right? Because nobody wants to be called out. So this is a warning against that. Don't punish those who speak out about what's wrong. But that often does happen in life. People who speak out against injustice are often treated badly. A man of knowledge uses words with restraint, and a man of understanding is even-tempered. Yeah, we've heard that before. Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue. I've heard that before too, right? If you keep, it's always safer to keep your mouth shut, right? Okay, chapter 18. An unfriendly man pursues selfish ends. He defies all sound judgment. A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. That, again, the theme of you got to be careful with your tongue. When wickedness comes, so does contempt, and with shame comes disgrace. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook. It is not good to be partial to the wicked or to deprive the innocent of justice. A fool's lips bring him strife, and his mouth invites a beating. A fool's mouth is his undoing, and his lips are a snare to his soul. Okay? A fool gets themselves into trouble with what they say. The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to a man's inmost parts. Right? That's a bad thing, right? Gossip is enticing, right? It's exciting. People love it. That's all these. You got TV shows that are almost magazines that are almost entirely devoted to gossip about this or that celebrity. People love it. They eat it up. One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. So that's a condemnation of the lazy. So Proverbs condemns laziness as well as greed. Right? They're equal. Proverbs condemns laziness as well as greed.
Okay.
The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall. Right? But that's bad, right? People think that wealth will keep them safe, but they're wrong. Verse 12, before his downfall, a man's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. That's the same thing as pride comes before a fall, but the opposite. He who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. Right? Listen first, talk later. A man's spirit sustains him in sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? All right, that's, I think, speaks to, the Bible might not use these words, but we would call it depression. Right? Someone who's depressed is not able to function the way someone whose mind is healthy can function. And this, I don't think there's a judgment here. I think this is simply descriptive. It's saying, teaching us that when your spirit is burdened, when you're depressed, no one functions correctly. And this is what mental illness does. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge. The ears of the wise seek it out. A gift opens the way for the giver and ushers him into the presence of the great. The first to present his case seems right till another comes forward and questions him. Right? That's again cautioning. Don't pass judgment right away. Right? You've only heard one side of the argument. That's good advice today for people watching the news. Right? You're often, when you watch the news, you're often only hearing one side. You're not hearing the other side. So be careful. The first to present his case seems right till another comes forward. So you don't always get the whole story. So reserve judgment until you hear all sides. Casting the lot settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. That's in high school growing up. That's how we settled. Paper, rock, scissors. Have you ever heard of that? Or rock, paper, scissors, or flip a coin, right? It works on kids too. I use it with my kids sometimes. They're fighting over something, and I'll just say, let's flip a coin, and whoever wins gets it. That's a way to end some disputes. Casting lots settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. An offended brother is more unyielding than a fortified city, and disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. From the fruit of his mouth a man's stomach is filled. With the harvest from his lips he is satisfied. Again, the importance of the tongue. You can read it in James. Remember when we read James together in the New Testament? And James talked a lot about the tongue, didn't he? Do you remember those verses? No? I didn't, right? But go back and read James. James, the brother of Jesus. there's a whole section in there that's all about the tongue, and what we say is so important. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. A poor man pleads for mercy, but a rich man answers harshly. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Yeah, so when hard time, that's going back to the theme of hard times in friendship. That if you've kept good friends, when you fall in hard times, you'll have someone to help you. So don't take your friends for granted, is I think the message. Okay, 10 minutes till, let's see if we can finish 19. Better a poor man whose walk is blameless than a fool whose lips are perverse. I've heard that before. It's not good to have zeal without knowledge, nor to be hasty and miss the way. Right? Zeal is passion, right? So passion, strong feelings, are not good without knowledge. So it's not actually saying passion is bad. It's saying if your passion is not paired with reason, thought, learning, then it's bad. Does that make sense? A man's own folly ruins his life, yet his heart rages against the Lord. Wealth brings many friends, but a poor man's friend deserts him. That's that idea we've heard before today, right? That wealth, when you're wealthy, you have lots of connections, you have lots of opportunities, but when you're poor, those opportunities, those resources, those human connections tend to dry up. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who pours out lies will not go free. Many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is the friend of a man who gives gifts. Right? That's the same theme.
Who gives?
A poor man is shunned by all his relatives. How much more do his friends avoid him? Though he pursues them with pleading, they are nowhere to be found. He who gets wisdom loves, and this is not a good thing, right? It's not saying that's great. That's how it's just describing how the world is, right? There's an element to this that is not everything Proverbs says is it celebrating or saying yes, that's the way it should be. But it's true. I mean, you've seen it. I've been here for 5 years, and I've done over 30 funerals. Rich people have more people at their funerals than poor people. It just because they have more connections. That it's just a fact of life. That with having money comes connections. And I think the lesson is again to be more compassionate for the poor and to recognize that poor people often don't have the same opportunities as someone who is not poor. Okay, verse 8. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. He who cherishes understanding prospers. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who pours out lies will perish. Lying, again, another strong theme in Proverbs. It is not fitting for a fool to live in luxury. How much worse for a slave to rule over princes. A man's wisdom gives him patience. It is to his glory to overlook an offense. A king's rage is like the roar of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. A foolish son is his father's ruin, and a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping. Again, these things, I think, this is just descriptive. It's describing how things are, right? If your son is foolish, that is going to be harmful. And a quarrelsome wife is like constant dripping, like a faucet that you can't stop. It's houses and wealth. I'm sure it's the same way for a husband. A quarrelsome husband is just as bad. Houses and wealth are inherited from parents, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Laziness brings on deep sleep, and the shiftless man goes hungry. He who obeys instructions guards his life, but he who is contemptuous of his ways will die. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, right? That's Jesus, right? What does Jesus say? What you've done to the least of these, you've done to me, right? Proverbs is saying the same thing. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord. So kindness to the poor is kindness to God. And that's why I say God takes sides. God takes the side of the poor. Because what you do to the poor, what you do to the least of these is what you do to God. and he will reward him for what he has done. Discipline your son, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to his death. And that's an important lesson. A lot of parents today, and I can feel the temptation too. You don't want to discipline your children. You want to be nice to your children, but sometimes you have to give your children hard consequences. But by doing that, there is hope. That's discipline your son, for in that there is hope. Don't be a willing party to his death. Right? By not disciplining your child, you're hurting them. Even in the moment, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, because I don't think any loving parent wants to punish or give their children hard consequences. But to not do it, you're actually harming them more, is what this is saying. 19, a hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. If you rescue him, you will have to do it again. Listen to advice and accept. Again, the idea, verse 19, a hot-tempered man. One of the themes of Proverbs is don't be governed by your passions, your feelings, your emotions. Your emotions are not bad, but your emotions without education, without reason, without careful thought, without advice, your feelings are not a good way to live your life based on your feelings. You can have the feelings, but they have to be moderated, mixed, tempered with reflection and thought and education. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Listen to advice and accept instruction, and in the end you will be wise. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. What a man desires is unfailing love. Better to be poor than a liar. That's a theme in my house lately. I've started to teach my kids. You have to teach your kids to tell the truth very, very strongly and early. I don't know if you found that, but my kids know that the worst thing you can do is lie. You'll get a harsher punishment. We will punish you worse if we find out that you lied than if not. If you just did the wrong thing and are honest about it, your punishment will be less. Because I think this is true. It's better to be poor than a liar is the worst thing you can be. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He will not even bring it back to his mouth. Flog a mocker, and the simple will learn prudence. Rebuke a discerning man, and he will gain knowledge. Right? There's always the fool, the simple person can learn if they're willing, if they're humble, if they're open-minded. He who robs his father and drives out his mother is a son who brings shame and disgrace. Stop listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. Right? Don't stop learning. Right? Don't get to the point where you think you know it all. That's the worst place you could be in. It says, stop listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray. And I think people often think that when they're done with school, they graduate from college or whatever, and they get their job, they think, okay, I'm done, And even in church, they think, I went to Sunday school when I was a kid. I don't have anything else to learn. I don't need to go to Bible study. I'm good. Don't think that way, it says, because if you stop listening to instruction, you will stray from the words of knowledge. Last two verses, a corrupt witness mocks at justice, and the mouth of the wicked gulps down evil. Penalties are prepared for mockers and beatings for the backs of fools. So, again, the fool will be treated according to his folly, and the wise will gain even more. Okay, thanks everybody. Let me say a quick prayer. Thank you, God, for bringing us together. I thank you for everyone that could join us here in person and everyone who could join us online. We pray that you would help us to be wise, help us to be humble, help us to be willing to listen to correction and to speak the truth and to follow the good teachings that are here in your word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's see. We had Patty, Dorothy, Linda, Joan, Leslie, Doris. Hi, Doris. Hi, Heather. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.